Thank you all for coming so much. It's so awesome to see such a full house already. In the spirit of this music festival, we're going to start off with one of video games' most well-known melodies. Do enjoy. On screen, you'll see a score, so feel free to look as you listen.
Here we go. Oh. 1, 2, oh, shit. All right.
You gotta give us some more.
That was not working? Okay. All right, here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Well, workshop, this is a range of music for video games. My name is Rosen, and these are some members of the 8-Bit Big Band. The 8-Bit Big Band is my combination pops, jazz, video games, jazz orchestra that ranges from generally 18 to 65 pieces. that I created to honor the tradition of music we love, video game music. This is my first time here at MAGFest, and I have to say already I am so incredibly overwhelmed with the amount of excitement and enthusiasm there is for this culture, and this is fucking it's awesome. I'm so happy to be here. I am a lifelong gamer that has really found a healthy home for myself doing arrangements and orchestrating and music directing in the world of TV and theater. Yeah, thank you. And I work professionally, and I'm lucky enough to make a living doing that. And after a while, I really wanted to come back to my first love, which is video game music. So I wanted to combine my two greatest interests, which is large ensemble arranging, orchestras, jazz orchestras, big bands, all this stuff, and video game music, which is a well of incredibly deep and complex material that I think needs to be honored and celebrated in the same way that we celebrate other art forms and all sorts of genres. So, having recorded plenty of orchestra and big band music, I thought it was finally time to start my own ensemble, and this is some members of that, what you see here today. So, now, just to clarify a couple things, big band specifically refers to a specific ensemble type here, which is 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, 2 alto saxes, 2 tenor sax, a bass sax, and 4 rhythm section. That's what I mean when I say big band, and that's usually what we have, right? Plus, a lot of the times we'll also add 20 strings, choir, percussionists, woodwinds, harp, whatever flights of fancy I feel like the music needs or deserves. Luckily, I have all sorts of friends with me that can help me realize those dreams, which is very cool and continues to excite me. But what I have here today is a more utility-sized ensemble of 6 horns representing basically the sounds of a big band and a rhythm section. And what's great about that is it's good to demonstrate sort of the core concepts of what arranging is and what voicing and orchestrating and all these terms that I'm going to get to explaining very shortly. So, all the examples you're going to hear today will all be sourced from video game and video game music, video game scores, and I know this audience is all music lovers, but I'm sure we're all at various mixed levels of music. I see a lecture right there, fuck yeah, of various proficiencies. So, just to make sure semantically that we're all on the same page, let's talk about a couple of key words here, right? So what is arranging? Arranging is the process of taking elements of a piece of music and reordering them or expanding upon them to create a more interesting journey for your listener and to create a bigger and a more involved contour, over the piece of like the arc of the music, right? So the basic building blocks of any piece of music are its melody. Sure. We have its harmony or its chord changes in Western music at least, and its rhythm or the duration of time with which it happens, right? So arranging is taking those basic elements and using various techniques to expand or manipulate them or come up with new ideas or concepts of how we might expand and conversate on the topic of the melody that we've been given, right? So the metaphor that I always like to use to talk about arranging is like painting or design, any kind of drawing, but let's use painting. So to give an example of like the way into the whole thesis of this lecture, I've prepared a couple of things. Using Rosalina in the observatory from Super Mario Galaxy, I'm going to show you how we utilize different methods of arranging to expand upon. So, first we have here my good friend Alana, she's an animator, created this line drawing of me. Very cool. This line drawing represents the melody, right? It's your basic building blocks, it's the foundation, right? It's what we are working from. So, in this situation, we will represent the melody via the tenor sax, right? Flugelhorn, thank you. And check this out. Ready? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 2, 3. So this is our melody, right? It's a sketch. The chord changes over here, we have the melody over here. This is the basic element of what we're playing, right? Anyways, I love this melody. So the next step, when we fill in all the blanks in this step, we have a more fleshed out version of this sketch, right? We're now starting to utilize all the colors in the orchestra. Trophies are what we're doing. Which is very cool, right? Starting to have all these colors, all these chords.
using the same line drawing, the same sketch, right? We're illustrating it in different ways using our personal palette of colors instead of paint. And our personal palette of colors as the arranger is the sounds we're given to work with, right? The various instruments we have, and sort of larger scaffolding things, which I'm about to talk. So essentially, the process of arranging can be boiled down to the combination of just two concepts that we manipulate, right? And that's form and texture. So let's talk about those two things. Form, the big picture thing, right? Form is what we use to talk about the different large sections of a piece of music that add up over time to create our arrangement, right? It's our easel and our canvas that define the size and the parameters with which we can paint. And so these are words that we're very familiar with, you know, verse, chorus, bridge, solo, interlude, vamp, maybe, pre-chorus. Any combination of these are form. These are the big building blocks, right? Makes sense? What we do is we take these parts and we put them together to make a sort of roadmap for our chart, right? Our arrangement. Musicians sometimes call it a chart, so if I say that, just know that's what I mean. An arrangement. And what you can see here is the roadmap from the Tetris arrangement that we started with, right? So the original song is right there at the top, A2, and B. Obviously, back in the day, they didn't have a lot to work with time-wise, so they got creative. So now I've taken it and used other elements here to make a more fleshed out roadmap for you that has peaks and valleys and contours. Here's some other examples of forms and different kinds of genres. So the genre also dictates what elements of the form are, you know, and different genres obviously have different names for their sections. But what's most important about form is that we use it to introduce variation and contrast in our piece, depending on which building blocks we choose, right? And so, we have the ability to add elements of the form to flesh out the idea of this melody and take it in new directions. And a good arrangement shouldn't really be just a straight line of the melody, but it should be mapping out the intensity and breaking expectations and surprising your audience. And listen, so what is most important is that although there's a lot of different labels for the sections of form, is that you just can effectively plan your roadmap of your chart to give a good listening experience, yeah? Cool. So the other word we had was texture, right? We have form and texture. So here's some elements of texture. Texture, if form is the framework and the parameters in which our painting is created, then texture is the actual painting itself. It's the paints. It's how we use the paints, right? We've created our form, now what do we put in the form? Texture is the combination of whatever the sound, or paints, is being created at any given point in time during your song or on your easel. The texture is a function of your instrumentation and the various colors and instruments that are created and used to create the intended sound or the feeling that you're trying to convey. Cool. Every instrument is capable of creating a variety of textures, you know? So all of these things have different sounds, and what's important to us as painters here, as arrangers, is knowing how these colors combine to create new colors or new textures. So, and as well as the functions that these instruments can do. So, the experienced arranger knows how to blend these sounds to really make some more complex sounds. Very cool shit, right? So, at any given point in time in arrangement, and this is really the key here. This is the key to what I think being a good arranger is. Let me take a sip of water dramatically. The key to being a great arranger. Now, what I think the most important part of arranging is breaking down any part of an arrangement into 3 levels of activity, 3 layers, right? Any part of a texture is happening in 3 layers simultaneously. Your primary, your secondary, and your tertiary layer. That's what's going on in your arrangement moment to moment, right? That's what you're listening to. So in your primary layer, you have the focal point of your arrangement, which is your melody, your horn soloist, somebody improvising, somebody talking, if it's, spoken word, your lyrics, whatever it might be. That's the focal point of your arrangement. And the solo and the melody can be harmonized, but that's what's in front. That's your subject, right? Your secondary layer is whatever is creating the chord changes, or the underlying system of chord changes or harmony that's happening, right? So that's your piano, your guitar, anybody playing any background lines under your melody, which I will get to. I'll explain what those are and how we can make those. And then your tertiary layer, which is a fancy word for your third layer, you have anybody who's responsible for creating your groove or your feel or your bass line. These 2 guys here. That would be Brian over here on the drums, laying it down. And that also includes Adam Neely on the bass, who is responsible for laying down the foundation of our chord changes and also providing feel and groove with drummer. And if there was a phantom percussionist over there, I would also put that person in that layer as well. Great. So the thing to know about these layers before we jump into another piece of music is that these three layers are fluid. They are not consistent over time. The thing that makes your arrangement interesting is that instruments can jump and move from layer to layer in surprising ways. The guitar player can and often will play the melody of a song, which puts that person into the first layer. The horn soloist will go back and play chords with the other horn players, which puts them back into layer 2. Sometimes the bass player will even play the melody, which brings that bass player up to layer 1, and for his final moment in the sun, after all these years. And the movement between these layers is what gives textural variation over time. So, a way to create texture changes is to fluctuate the intensity of any given layer in a couple of different musical parameters. You can actually skip a slide. All right, how fun. I'm gonna use Zelda's Lullaby to demonstrate this. How awesome. So, as I was saying, to fluctuate the intensity in any given layer in a couple of different musical parameters. And this is the way that we create contour over the course of time, by using these contrasts on the sliding scale of intensity amongst a couple of key attributes, right? Here's a few parameters we can adjust between textures. Okay, cool, so check this out, right? Here, like we did before, is a similar example of building, except I'm gonna use Zelda's Lullaby and add in some layers and change the intensity of them and talk about then what I did, right? So, here is the melody.
Who's doing this? You? Great.
Here we go. A 1, 2, 3, 2, 2. This is layer 1, right? This is the entire song. This is layer 1. Layer 2. Reharmonization. The example before was more activity and thickness. The activity before that, and the example before that was the bass playing in the other layer, and then we added in layers one at a time. Sorry, I wasn't advancing the slides. The final way that we can change it is by adjusting more global parameters of the arrangement, like its tempo, its time signature, and its groove. So here's that. Ready? 1, 2, 3. A great example of one more example of a way that we can intensify a layer is by just having our instrumentalists solo to create a really exciting texture, and also you don't have to write anything out for them, so you save so much time. Have fun. Cool. So the next thing we're gonna do, let me talk about this a little bit. The artistry, I think, in arranging is actually having the vocabulary of all of these texture shifts available to you in the parameters such as volume shifts, octave shifts, key change shifts, tone, and the colors you have to recall quickly on the tip of your tongue while you're arranging in the context of your song so that you can create contrast in your sections over time to give your arrangement a journey. That's what makes a great arrangement, I think, and not just a straight line. The job of the arranger is to listen to a lot of music and to absorb the vocabulary from different genres so that you can understand what your options are with your various instruments to get there, Great, yeah. It's also the job of the arranger to know the amount of time they have with him to work with. For example, we just had a very short amount of time for me to create a fairly large build. So to map that out over the course of a 3-minute pop song or an hour-long symphony, say, requires a slightly different technique which affects your form and your texture. Now, to give a performance example of how these elements move and evolve through time, we're going to perform the overworld theme, Super Mario Bros. 2. And in the style of like a classic big band and swing setting, While we do so, check out the score on screen here. There will be some information displayed in real time, and this info will be in any given section of the score, what the name of the form is up top, the current intensity level, I think relative to the form based on how thick it is, and what's playing, and then the 3 layers broken down, and what's going on in each layer, to give you a more inside look at like, what's going on in my brain as I arrange this in real time, Let's check it out.
Here we go.
Let this band stop there. Holy shit. Hey, can we take a little second to introduce y'all to this band? This is Natalie Tenenbaum on the keys over here. Fantastic. We have Sam Dillon on tenor sax over here. Andrew Gould on the alto. Andy Butowski's on the bass. Julia Kamal on the trombone. Tony Lane on lead trumpet. Eddie Bonet on trumpet two. Alan Neely on the bass. Brian Carter on the drums. Incredible, man. Really incredible. Yeah, what a singer. Cool, so now part two of this arrangement, part two of this talk rather, I'd like to take a closer look at 3 examples of specific tools that we can use as arrangers to use in our toolbox or in our paintbrush kit to give us the colors and the variation that I've been talking about more generally, right? So, the first tool that we use to do such is our instrumentation, right? And here's 3 examples of horns that we have in this ensemble here, and you can see that this list under these horns is the various colors that I have at my disposal that these horns can make, right? And also under some common doubles that you should be able to expect in a professional setting that they can also use to give some more abstract colors or different textures, right? And so, to demonstrate how important it is for an arranger to have these things at their fingertips, I am going to do something completely improvised and off book. I have absolutely nothing written down for this. They don't know what I'm going to say or do. I'm going to go to some random horn player and just make them play something in some style to demonstrate some things that I will not tell them. The first candidate is Sam Dillon on tenor sax. Now Sam, can you play some sexy subtone tenor sax stuff? Old school. Wow, really nice, right? That's called subtone. It's a way of using your mouth to get a different sound. That's really sexy. That's exactly what I wanted. That's why you work with us. Now, can you play some more aggressive, just bop shit? So like Michael, I don't know, you know, supposed to, like, let's hear that bright tenor shit. Now growl.
Growl.
Or however you That's that. Now Andrew Gould growl. Now you growl in alto. Now play some smooth jazz. Do you know how to do multiphonics? Oh, that's out. Now play some stanky low-berry shit. Hey, that's good. Yeah, okay. Now, Jimmy, play a slide twist from your lowest note all the way up. Okay, now do the teacher from Charlie Brown talking. It's right there. I see it. It's right there. I see it. I see you got it. That's a plunger. He's literally using a plunger. You got that. John also, you got a plunger. Nick's got a plunger. Now play some 30s dirty plunger shit with your plunger. Let him plunge. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is the more vocabulary you have with these various instruments, the more you will hear a piece of music and go, you know what would be fucking awesome if I did X, because I know how to do X because I've heard somebody else do X and I've absorbed X. Killing. Wow. Let's move on to part 2. This is the big one. Reharmonization. This is an endlessly deep topic that I can't go into too far in the constraints of the next, whatever, 20 minutes I have left. But here's a couple of techniques that I can use to talk about ways that we can use it, right? So reharmonization is the concept of recontextualizing your melody by adjusting the chord changes in layer 2 that are played behind it. And it can be thought of as adding additional and more interesting scenic elements, to your setting. with your main character as the melody inhabiting these new chord changes. When you reharmonize a melody, you give the melody new color by changing its underlying texture, right? So we as arrangers can assign function to each melody note by talking about its relationship to the chord behind it, right? For example, but I'm going to ask in one sec, if we take the chord C, the note E is the major third. Is that cool? We cool so far? We good? Okay, good. Just making sure. The note G is its fifth. Still cool? Okay, great. Awesome. Yeah, very smart crowd, thank you. As arrangers, we talk about its melody's function. We're only speaking just to clarify its relative function to the chord that's happening in real time, not the key signature that we're in, which is something I've had to explain a number of times, right? So, what we can do with that, here we have an example of analyzing a melody via its function. So that Super Mario Bros. 2 overworld goes 5, 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1, flat 7, 13, 1, 3, 13, 1, 3, 13, 3, 5, flat 7, tension 9, 1, and to clarify one point, as arrangers, in a scale we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? 2, 4, and 6 become the tensions, which are 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, right? Thank you. So, when we count that scale as arrangers, we go 1, 9, 3, 11, 4, 1, 9, 3, 11, 5, 13, 7, 1. Great, so that's why there's 13 there. Okay, cool. Did I lose anybody? Amazing! Yay, great. Okay, awesome. So, now, check this out as we play a couple of chords here, swapping out the chord tones, which are 1, 3, and 5, for some more interesting 2, 9, also known as 9s, 11s, and 13s, right? And then I'll talk a little bit about that. Here's some chord tones becoming tensions. These are all on cue. So first we have a triad. How glorious is that, right? So there's a lot of C's. This is a C chord. There's a lot of additional C's. I don't think we need all the C's right there in example 1. So we're going to change trumpet 1 C to a major 7. And the rule of thumb is 1s can become 7s or 9s. So here it is with a 7. And. Hey, someone play a B flat in that example?
Oh, my bad.
Let's do it again. Major 7. Great, we still have another 1 in there, so let's sorry, bro. Let's swap out that extra 1 for a 9, so we have 7 and 9 for a little bit more color. And here's an alternative voicing where we swapped the two things we swapped. Very cool. Now let's change the 5. Again, the 5 can become 11 or 13. So 1 can become 7 or 9. 5 can become 11 or 13. Now we're changing the 5 to 13. Starting to get thick, yeah? Now let's change the other 5 to 13 as well. Now we have 2 5s, here's 1 becoming 11. And as you can see, it's getting more and more rich and colorful. And of course, these are textures that, depending on the context of your song, you may or may not use, but you have these colors. Now, just as an example, that was all with a major 7. Are we cool with the difference between major 7 and dominant 7? Okay, cool. It's okay if not, I don't want to make anybody feel bad. Sometimes be fun. Yeah. But here's those same examples with a dominant 7 instead of a major 7. Here it comes. That's your triad. Here's the flat 7. Here's swapping out a root for a 9. Here's the same voice with the 7 and the 9 switched. Here's swapping out 5 for 13. Swapping out the other 5 for 11. And here's altering everything. Wow, you can tell with that chord, it has so much tension you really want it to resolve, but unfortunately it does not. Let's play an F chord, ready? So we use these tensions to create, they're called tensions because they make tense sounds that we want so badly to resolve. Society has told us that we need tension and resolution in this music, and that's how we do it. In Western music. Other kinds of music is another TED Talk which you can come to later. Great. The only other thing I want to talk about with reharmonization before I get into it, some methods, is that you can think of every note as having 12 possible functions. And the reason why is because there are 12 notes in our chromatic scale, right? So theoretically, every note can have 12 possible bass notes. That makes sense? Cool. And so with the same note, the number changes function depending on its relationship to the bass note. So see, the note up top there we have is G. And the chords down there are changing. They're going down by half steps. So the G's function goes from 1 to flat 9 to 9 to 3 to major 3 to minor 3 to major 3. The D sus, it's the sus 4. The D flat, it becomes tension sharp 11. Becomes the 5th in C, it becomes the flat 13. Then it becomes the 6th, then it becomes the dominant 7, then it becomes the major 7 and back to 1. Now, that was a lot, man, no. But I think you'll understand once you hear them play this, how one note can be reharmonized with 12 different chords just because it has 12 functions. Ready? Check this shit out. Yeah, how about those two trumpet players just playing a high button G over and over? I'm not saying boo to me. Now, of course, we're saying that every melody note has 12 possible chords, but that was pretty random, and out of context, that's not super musical. It is kind of impressive, but it's not a song, right? So how can we use reharm to know tastefully and artfully which chords we can put into a song in order to add variation over time? Here's some examples of using the main theme from Final Fantasy, reharm step by step using a couple different processes. And I'm going to stop after every arrangement and talk briefly about how I derived this reharm so that you might take some with you. First we have the main theme.
This is just me telling you who, like, no one has it, right? It's
Which horn do you want to play this theme first? Someone shout it out.
Trumpet!
Which trumpet? One first. First trumpet. Okay, can it be trumpet too? Is that okay? Yeah, that's good. And actually, why don't let's have you play it on flugelhorn.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Check this out. This is the flugelhorn. It's a little bit softer sounding than the trumpet. It's really nice. Ready? Check this shit out. 1, 2, 3. So now, here's another example of it, but we've swapped out some of the chords for what's called diatonic reharm, right? That was the example. Here's some diatonic chords. So this is taking chords from the same key that you're in and replacing them to give a little bit more variation, but still a nice centered sound, right? Everybody cool with this? This makes sense? Underlined to the chords from the key of C that we're going to use. And to play the melody, how about somebody say sax?
Barry. Tenor.
I heard Barry first, I like that. Barry, ready? 1, 2, 3. How nice, right? But not super far from where we came from. A little bit more variation, that would be good for maybe the second time through the melody. Also, I just want to point out, Barry is really well known for playing nice, fat, honky low notes, but like, what a beautiful high Barry sound. What an interesting texture, right? Not used a lot, but a really interesting and what I would consider a professional texture when utilized well, so that's really cool. Thanks for saying Barry. In this example, we're gonna add bass because we're using those same chords, but we're doing what's known as inversions. Should I define inversions for anybody in this group? Just a 10-second version. We're flipping the chords so that the notes and the chords are in different spots. Cool, great. This adds a little bit more bass motion, a little bit more color, and we're gonna do Ghoul while you play it on.
Yeah.
And Adam, we're gonna add Adam on the bass so you can hear it. 1, 2, 3. Now it goes up. Getting soulful with it too. Yeah. Now here's another example where we introduce what's known as secondary dominance. The chord we're going to, we take the 5 chord from that chord as if we were in that key, and we borrow it. We take it. And I would go more into it, but that's the short version for now. If you want more, feel free to hit me up on Instagram. Here is that. And also I might add that you can now feel free to go jazz up that melody like Ghoul just did, because we've heard it 6,000 times. Let's do it on 10. Cool? And get soulful with it. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Let's get into something. We're going to get into 2 or 3 a little more advanced topics, so let me know if I lose anybody. Already you can hear that using these non-diatonic chords, these secondary dominants, are starting to add really a lot of color. Here's a technique called modal interchange, where we take different scales that start with the same note. Okay, so we're in C major. There's all sorts of scales we can borrow chords from. Modal interchange is borrowing chords from other scales with the same start note. So in C natural minor, we can take that minor 5, that's interesting, and bring that over. Mixed Lydian gives us a nice flat 7/7, that's cool. Phrygian's got flat 2, that's cool. You know, all sorts of options here. This is a method we can use to get some more complex chords. Let's introduce some modal interchange into that. Let's add a drum groove, you know? Let's get it down. Who hasn't played this melody yet?
Boom.
Jimmy. Here we go, let's introduce some modal interchange. We'll do a little faster now, okay. 1, 2, 3. Very cool. We really got colorful now, huh? And now for our final, there's 2 more. Are you good for 2 more examples of this? Is this cool? How you feeling good? You like this stuff? Okay, cool. You know, sometimes I don't want to alienate people. I don't want to get too mathematical, but you're cool. You seem like a good crowd. You're into this, yeah? You like this stuff? Okay, cool. I love that. Let's do 2 more examples. Here's a more out one. Tritone substitution. To sum this up in a very short amount of time, a dominant 7 chord. Cool? A dominant 7 chord. The 2 most important notes in this chord are its 3rd and its 7th, because that tells us that it's major and it's a flat 7. So it's a dominant 7. Those 2 notes are a tritone interval. Tritone has 2 possible roots that share it, because if you invert it, it becomes the tritone of a different chord, because it's a symmetrical interval. It's halfway between all 12 notes, so it can be inverted. We look here, we'll see that the tritone of G7 is B and F. The tritone of D flat 7 is also B and F, but flipped over. How fun. Every dominant 7 chord has a partner dominant 7 chord that it can be swapped with. So, you can use that to change out all your dominant 7s for fun new dominant 7s, which give different bass motion and a lot of other colors. Because any notes that are now on top of that chord have new functions. Because every note can have all 12 functions. Great. Here's an example with some tritone subs, played by the one and only John Lake. You want to play out flute?
Trumpet's great.
Trumpet's great. And let's do it a little slow so you can really hear this crunchy tritone subs. Ready? We'll pull up. There it is. All the underlined ones are tritone subs. 1, 2, 3. For our final, and I would say our most colorful. Oh, you know We have one more, and then we have a combination example. This is introducing parallel motion, in which we use the same chord type over and over that goes in the direction of the melody. So if you start with C6 and your melody goes up, you go up in the same amount as your melody does. That's an interesting way to get some cool harmony. That makes sense, yeah? Let's check that out. And let's have alto and tenor play it together. Yeah? Sure. Check this out. You'll see here the bracketed chords are where I switch to a different kind of chord for my parallel melody. 1, 2. For the reharmonizer out there. There is a line in which your reharm stops serving the dramaturgy of your melody, as I like to say, in which it's what we colloquially like to say, that's too fucking much. Sorry, I can never teach it in college. This is not okay. Anyway. So that is an example of parallel harmony that you can use, like you might use a really rare and exotic spice that overwhelms the taste of your dish, but in small amounts, really brings out the flavor. So pick some key moments in your song and do that. Now, after I said that whole message about taste, let's play this final example in which I use literally everything I just said. And let's do, I don't know, someone call 2 instruments out.
Voice, bass,
Everything. I like the way you think. All 6 horns. Love that. We got an arranger over here. Ready? 1, 2. There you have it. Now the third and final thing we like to use in our arrangement is called voicing. And so you have these instruments, what notes are they going to play? You know, let me get you. So if a chord is defined by 3 or more notes then simultaneously, then the order in which those notes are played is known as its voicing. And when working with a bass player in your band, the bottom note will always be grounded by that instrument. So it's the job of the instruments on top to give color through their voicings. If you're lucky enough to be working with a number of instruments in your band that can all play long held notes like horns or strings, then you're tasked with a decision about how to voice those instruments and how they will collaborate on your melody, right? And this will give you a thinner or thicker texture depending on how you voice this line. Now, the more instruments you have, the more of an ability you're going to have to assign your instruments to the main voicing, background voicings which exist, the more layers you can get complicated with your layers. So using the same song, Final Fantasy, here's an example of some voicing styles that you might use to use in your textures to give more variation, you know? Let's play this down. No formatos. Ready? Here we go. 1, 2, 3. This is unison. Everybody together. Right? Sorry to cut that short. If you have more questions, again, you can hit me up on Instagram, which, by the way, is at the 8-Bit Big Band. So you should all follow and ask me more theoretical questions, because I love them, at the 8-Bit Big Band. In conclusion, we can for like 2 charts to play them down?
Yeah, you guys
great. Awesome. I love that. We're going to put all of that stuff into practice. with a couple of more songs for you before we wrap up this event. And so to give it a performance example of how a melody can be passed around from color to color and voiced in various configurations, different textures and different instruments, and different configurations of harmony with background lines and voices woven in and around said melody, here's an arrangement of Aquatic Ambiance from Donkey Kong Country. One of my favorites. Great. And it's arranged in a more contemporary jazz setting. Now, if you're familiar with that melody at all, you'll know that it sort of goes with this piano thing, right? It's the piano melody, and then the main melody comes in, and then that loops over and over. Now, you'll see there's one section where I took that melody, same rhythm, reharmed it, and gave it a different melodic, a totally different melody with the same rhythm, because I needed more variation before Andrew Gould rips the solo. So just keep an ear out for that, because I think it's a pretty cool additional sort of C section, and it will say C sections. Great. This is Aquatic Ambiance from Donkey Kong Country. Also introducing some doubles, our tenor sax on clarinet, alto on flute. Our bass sax will also be on clarinet, although a lot of the times he's playing bass clarinet. But in this setting, I needed 2 clarinets. We have our flugelhorns happening, and Jimmy's just got the bone. This is Aquatic Ambiance. Also, I wanted to add a little bit more ethereal to this texture, an ethereal nature, and so this is Danielle Gimble, a singer, a very talented singer. She is going to float on top of a sort of technique commonly used in film scoring and games, this sort of like very ethereal soprano sound. You've all heard it. It really adds a lot of like otherworldliness and flavor to, especially when doubled with horns. So check her out, she's great. Let's take a look. Here's Aquatic Ambiance. put it on one time to now the title on the piano of this piece. Really clever. So, the third and final part of this, and as we bring this to a close, is the sort of practice and implementation of all the things that we just talked about. And this is something I like to say when I think of arrangers, and great arrangers. It's arrangers that understand the dramaturgy of arranging, is a word I like to use. And so the dramaturgy is a word I borrowed from theater, meaning the understanding of storytelling and be able to parse and tell story well. So I think what makes the arrangement of a song interesting is its dramaturgy. Understanding the abstract storytelling of the arrangements through its highs and its lows, and its peaks and valleys over time, much like a story, right? So what our skill is as arrangers is then to hear songs, like I said, into other textures, and interpret the dramaturgy and say, how's this making me feel and why, and what is doing it? So that you can add it to your ever-growing palette of colors and sounds and textures that you might use in your own arrangements, in your own storytelling, right? One common flaw of beginning arrangers is that they think that all instruments need to be playing at the same time, which creates this sort of mono-textural thing, which sometimes is true when you only have a trio, of course, but still within that, finding the highs and the lows, and the thicks and the thins, the softs and the louds of each instrument and its function through, if it can't be instrumentation, because you only have three, then it can be through a number of other parameters, right? So hopefully, all of these concepts will give you, if you're a listener or a musician, an insight into the way that you might experience music through the arranging process of it, and how that guides our listening and perception of the songs that we love, right? The more awareness that you can bring to these journeys to the song, be it its arranging, the more you can enjoy listening or creating it, you know? So, wrapping it up, I would say, growing up as a huge gamer, I mostly learned a lot about the use of texture and arranging and composing through primarily game scores, as much as many of us probably have, right? I could honestly probably do an entire 2-hour talk here about the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time soundtrack, and how every track on that has its own gem of theoretical wisdom that I could break down. That'll be next year, maybe. Anyway, and what I found to be exciting and different about the functions of arranging in video games specifically is that the form and the function and the texture of these arrangements is dictated by the gameplay, right? And so in a way, when we're playing video games that have interactive music, that need to change and grow depending on what's going on screen, then the player is the arranger. They're dictating the arrangement. And if you can become aware of how that's working, then you've already taken a huge step forward in your own personal arranging process, right? So it's really a universal function of how we experience music, and I hope that you've been able to sort of extrapolate the bigger purpose of why I wanted to do this talk, yeah? So thank you very much. You've been a really attentive audience, and just give yourselves a hand for that. Now, I kind of like to make here is take a look at, I think, probably, I don't want to get argued, but the most beloved musical theme of all time, which is the Super Mario Bros. Theme, yeah? They only, at the time of composing this 8-bit stuff, which is what really blows my mind, is they had 3 notes and a noise channel, right? And within those really, really limited framework, they had to use very simple sounds to create a whole array of mood, texture, form, atmosphere, all within like 30 seconds per song, right? And yet somehow they were able to do that through the use of composition and technique and textures. Now, here's something that I'm very proud of, and I think uses every tool in the book that I've got that you've heard about and more. So synced up with my own personal gameplay of the first 2 worlds of Super Mario Brothers, I would like to perform my slightly reduced version of that score. Now originally, I synced this gameplay for a 65-piece orchestra and choir, and I've been tasked with reducing it to these 6 amazing musicians. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, you probably heard on that last song that there was a metric fuckload of strings, and that is because we are utilizing some tracks, just so we can be honest with each other. And we will continue to do so in this arrangement. Now, here is that gameplay, synced up with a larger color palette, filtered through the contextual arranging lens of my personal vocabulary as a contemporary jazz and pop large ensemble arranger. Now, I want just, the whole message here is see how the dramaturgy of this gameplay is enhanced by a more fully formed palette of textures and form choices. And as before, the score will be displayed on screen side by side with the gameplay, as well as a text description of the current texture, and after which I'm happy to sit and have a brief Q&A with you all. Once again, thank you so much for coming, and long live video game music. Please enjoy.
Shall we? 2, 3.
I think we have time. Yeah, a couple questions. Yeah, sure. Thanks for facilitating that. So yeah. Anybody? Questions? Comments? Oh boy. One of those two in the back. I can't tell who raised their hand first. You on the end, sure.
So for writing for larger ensembles, are there any resources you would suggest for kind of getting at least some kind of different ways of how to approach it? I know your approach seems very like idiomatic, you want to evoke this type of music, whatever, but anything more general? Because most of the arrangement advice I see is just do it, and that's unhelpful.
Not helpful at all. That's true, there is so much arrangement stuff that's like, just feel it, just vibe, you'll feel it. But there's a lot of technique to it, for sure. And if you want to dive into it, there's a couple books that I really love. There's an arranger named Don Sebesky, and he wrote a book about contemporary arranging for studio orchestra, classical and jazz and pop. And that book is actually where I got the origin of the sort of 3-layer system. And I would look into that book. Don Sebesky, also Henry Mancini has a really great book about technique that I would definitely look into. Because I went to Berkeley, there's a really great arranging for large ensemble book there. That's a really good one. And then the other thing is score study. Score study is really important. And you know what I did that really helped me a lot? I don't know if you have the capability to do this or not, but if you have a home setup, if you have Logic or any kind of MIDI stuff, get a score. Download a score for free off of IMSLP. Download your favorite, like I downloaded Holst's The Planets and I recreated it. Do that, because that is like, oh, that's what cool, that's what's going on in the woodwinds here. Like, you really are forced to do it piece by piece and understand what those textures are doing. But for voicings and for like more mechanics of it, those 3 books were really big to me. Yeah,
Thank you.
Of course. Who's got a mic here?
You had this really interesting cadence at the end of your Final Fantasy arrangements. Is there a name for that type of cadence?
Yeah. Do you remember? Let's see which one specifically it was. I don't know.
It's like D flat, major,
Was it D flat?
to E flat to C.
The sort of flat 6, flat 7, 1.
Yeah.
You know what's funny is there isn't a formal name for it, but I often call it like the Disney, like a Disney cadence, because you hear it a lot at the end of Disney movies. Yeah. But is there a formal name for that?
National anthem cadence.
The national anthem cadence. So there you go. I never learned one in school, but I learned one at jazz school. Anyone else? Yeah, there you go. We'll just go down the line here. We'll get you. Yeah, you go and we'll get you next.
I know Barry saxophone usually like plays bass lines, but if you already have a bass player, do you just double up on the bass line and that sort of stuff?
Really great question. Because one thing that I didn't really touch on is that another big mistake I hear a lot in a lot of beginning arranging is that things get too thick, especially in that low layer. And so Barry, when you have a bass player, oftentimes it's okay because it's in a jazz setting, the bass player is walking, and so the Barry player is articulating with the rest of the horns. But you do need to be cognizant of if the Barry is playing long lines or there's long pads, just making sure that it's not not too thick for that section. I mean, sometimes you do want that, but yeah, that is a really good question because oftentimes those low frequencies will compete. And also, there is a really important rule that I usually fall back on called low interval limits, in which below a certain range, you should really avoid closer intervals or more tense intervals because that's kind of what I think is giving the mud that you probably are asking the question about, you know? So like, it's okay if they do double, and I actually only double the 2 things if I really want like a super fat accented bass line. Otherwise, that's a pretty heavy texture. So just keep it to like articulating like a horn player, but just be aware of the voicing you're using and making sure that it's not competing. But you don't have to overthink it as well. Cool.
It's gonna be there and then up front. Yeah. Okay.
I was wondering how much of your music theory knowledge was self-taught versus if you went to school for music stuff.
It's a good question. I mean, luckily, I was born into a family of musicians. My mother was a bassoon player, and she's a classical musician, and my dad is like a jazz musician, but only jazz before like 1939.
It's the good jazz.
Yeah, the real shit. Yeah. So he would play he also was a this is wild, but he was a silent movie theater organist, or is, he's still around, he's just in LA. He's a silent movie theater organist, so we have like a pipe organ that accompanies silent movies that he would play. And because he was more of a pop and contemporary style, and he was arranging via playing the organ, you know, for these films, that was definitely my beginning, because I started taking piano lessons very young. So he gave me the groundwork, but then it was really when I got to high school and was playing in jazz band, and then eventually I did go to Berkeley, that I was able to sort of put labels on all of the concepts, like, oh, well that's what that's called, oh that's that chord progression, you know, like stuff like that. So it was a hybrid, you know, of listening and having a background from my parents and then going to school, which I was fortunate. Which is not to say that you can't learn all that stuff on your own, especially with the internet.
You did a good job explaining those music theory things.
Oh good, thank you.
A bit better than some of my teachers in college even, so good job.
Thank you, that actually means a lot. I appreciate that. It really means a lot. I think we had a question down here if we can get the mics down here.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Hi guys, first off, that was like sick, great job. My question's pretty quick. I was just wondering if you'd be considering posting the presentation slides.
Yeah, not only have I been considering doing that, I'm considering making like a version of this for YouTube. You know, like for
Do
the
it, please.
Yeah. Definitely, right? And also, I might make that Zelda thing that I'm talking about for YouTube too. So I'm playing around with that. But I think I'll break this up into maybe like 5-minute chunks.
I just want to mention that this is currently being recorded from Mediatron for MAGFest, and this will also be posted on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Hello, Internet.
In the meantime.
Fantastic.
Hi YouTube.
There you go. Hi, YouTube. Yeah. Hit me.
Hey, so my question is more about you talked about a lot of complex music theory concepts that like you said, you did a really good job explaining. What is your advice for sort of like studying music theory and like retaining it and applying it in a practical setting?
Yep, that's a really great question. I think of music theory a lot like learning a language, you know? So you can learn music theory out of a book, just like you can learn French out of a book, but if you don't speak it, it's just gonna sit in your brain and you're not gonna be able to really use it. You know, so the best advice I have is learn these concepts and try and put them into practice. I mean, if you have friends that play, try arranging something for them or with new concepts that you've learned. Set goals for yourself, like as if you were learning a language, like, oh, in this arrangement, I want to make sure to use at least one tritone sound. Things like that. But what's most important is that you have to speak the language. Otherwise, you're not going to have the vocabulary on the tip of your tongue when you want it. So you just got to kind of do it. If you have friends, and if you don't have resources and people to play for you all the time, which is hard to get, people are busy. A MIDI keyboard and your computer and start making some music. And that seems really daunting, but it is kind of the best way. You just got to do it.
Thank you.
Hi. So, in the spirit of the mock-up to improve your orchestration example you gave earlier, would you guys be willing to release the scores of one of you guys' arrangements and maybe STEM so people can study the arrangements you guys displayed really in detail?
Yeah, it's definitely something I've thought about a lot, and in its purely most altruistic sense, it's something I really want to do, and I will do, once I'm a little more set up with the full version of this band. You know what I'm saying? Like once we're playing and we're more ubiquitous, I think I would feel safer about doing that, because the internet is an incredibly amazing place, but I'm not going to give away all the secrets right now. You know what I'm saying? Once I get it set up and running, but I do want to do that, because I feel like contributing to the body of that education is important to me. So eventually is the answer. Oh, what's up, dude?
What's up? Hello.
Carlos. Okay.
So, it's really cool that you have this giant ensemble to work with. I mean, you have tracks, but whatever. So how do you go about getting such a wide variety of colors with like a quartet or something like that? If you're faced with the challenge of just tenor, piano, bass, drums, how do you get textural variety and constantly change those 3 layers of arrangements?
Right. Then it really boils down to how familiar are you with that instrument. You know, I luckily started on the piano when I was very young. I moved to the guitar when I was in high school because I wanted to be in bands. I went to Berkeley as a bass player, and actually when I was in high school, I was the jazz drummer in big band. So I got a really good familiarity with the sounds, and so you just start to think a little bit more about that. I'm not saying that everybody has to do that, but the more familiar you have with like, okay, what kinds of chords are available to me on the guitar or the piano, the more you can do more with less. You know, so more voicings, kinds of voicings on the piano, thicker, thinner. Of course, different keyboard sounds are important you can use if you have a keyboard. Guitar, knowing pedals, acoustic guitar, 12-string, using the variations within the more you know specifically on a small level. I guess the answer is the fewer instruments you have, the more you have to know about each instrument's palette in order to get variation. And it is difficult when you have a small ensemble, for sure. Drums, like when to bring in the hi-hat, when to use ride, when to use cross stick, when to use snare, when to play 8 notes on the floor toms, when to play 16 notes on the hat, when to go to the bell, when to, splash your ride open and closed, use the rims, play the stand, snap your fingers, use brushes, use hot rods. There you go. So it's stuff like that. It's that sort of instrumentation part of the presentation. This guy, there's two in the back there, yeah.
Well, first off, I would just want to say this is awesome. As a professional jazz musician, I greatly appreciate all of this that is happening and everything that you've done to make this what it is.
Thanks.
I guess for me, it's very interesting to think about how you go about arranging in this dramatic size and factor. My concern, my question to you is, do you ever, when you get started, let's say, I've heard stories and things where it's sometimes good that you don't start at the beginning of the chart or something. You have a roadmap like you were saying before.
Right.
But do you ever have an instance where you have sometimes too much information to get an idea of where to actually start?
Totally. Sometimes I'll start a chart and then it'll sit untouched for a year, And oftentimes when you do start something, like actually that Tetris one, for example, I just did the melody first. And I did the first, just I did that 8 bars, and then I was like, okay, now what do? And it's like, I didn't really know where to go. And it literally sat for 9 months, and then I picked it back up, and I was like, okay, well maybe I could do an alto solo in the second 8. And then it sat for another 5 months. And then, so, it's not often super obvious, and sometimes with arranging, I find that unless you're working on a deadline, it sort of just has to stew around in your brain until suddenly you come back to it and you're like, oh yeah, I can do that, I guess. There's sort of a gestation period sometimes with charts. Am I getting away from the...
No, I understand. I was gonna ask too, like, how do you, when you have a deadline that you have to meet or something, how do you force things to happen? Rather than like try to just put something out there and be like, this is okay.
The more you arrange over time, the larger your sort of bag of tricks becomes, So you're like, fuck, I need an ending. Okay, well, I know these 10 endings work that I've used over and over, and it's not really creative, it's a very gig, so like here you and I know it'll work, it'll sound good. So it's like in your bag of form tricks, you're like, okay, well, I know that this kind of interlude will work and needs something to balance out. I just played the melody and it needs something before the solo section, so it needs an interlude. And I don't really have time to be super creative, so what do I got? And you start looking through it. Okay, cool. So it's like over time, over practice, yeah.
Awesome, thanks so much.
Yeah, we'll do that.
So because you went to Berkeley, big music college, big jazz college, did you find you as a gamer kind of like at odds, like you were rocking Koji Kondo where everybody was like rocking like John Coltrane and Chick Corea? Serious?
No, it's great. It's a really good question. I know now Berkeley has this great video game minor, and I was not there when they were doing that, which is so sad. I know. I really missed out on that. But I guess, it didn't really come up because I wasn't playing a lot of game music at Berkeley, which looking back on it is very sad. Because I didn't have the chance, yeah.
What were you playing?
Jazz.
Well,
what
artists?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I was doing a lot of stuff. I was doing a lot of straight ahead and fusion stuff, and I was also playing organ in like a classic rock ensemble. I was playing congas in like a sort of world ensemble that taught non-percussionists how to play. And also, I will say that my Berkeley experience was a little different because I moved to New York after high school to work, and then I went off and on to Berkeley, and so I didn't actually play in a lot of ensembles. I would just go there and be like, oh, I really want to take this arranging class, this producing class, this South Indian rhythmic solfege class, and then I would sort of get in and out. So I wasn't super like on the scene as much as, I don't know if I'm actually totally qualified to answer, but I know that now they have a really great music, like video game music thing going on, so it's like a scene now for that, luckily. Hope that answers. Sorry, I wish I could more.
It's all good. You answered it.
Okay, good.
What's going on, Charles?
What's up? How's it going?
Yeah, I know, right? Different coast now. Me and Charlie go way back.
Yeah.
So, having known your musical theater experience and stuff like that, do you find both of those genres of typical musical theater composition orchestration influencing 8-bit, which is more simplified? And is there anything you can take from the 8-bit simplified and bring that back into the full orchestrations that musical theater is related to?
That's cool. That's a cool question. In a lot of ways, the skill sets cross over, especially since I'm sort of using the same orchestral vocabulary. But the thing that, again, I really love about going back to old scores is how much they could do with how little they had. And so that sort of minimalism of arranging and maximalization of environmentalness of the melody and the stuff they got is a skill that I think applies to like almost any genre you can write. So that's definitely something that I take with me from that stuff and apply to anything else I do, really. And vice versa. Sometimes I want to get grandiose and lush and full 1960s orchestra on video game music. So it just, it depends on the situation. Yeah. I don't know how many do we...
A couple more?
One or two more? Let's do two more now.
So I've been trying to get better at arranging for a cappella.
Cool.
And of course it's a little more restricted in terms of variety of sounds.
Right.
Because it's just voice. Totally. Out of the elements you mentioned earlier, are there any that you would recommend relying on to make up for that lack of diversity?
The thing about, and I did some a cappella arranging, I still do actually love it, but that is the tricky thing, is you only have one timbre, And but what's good about that is that really allows you to focus on your voices specifically. And so then it becomes like, how do I, without the voices overlapping each other, have those three layers, And of course, beatboxing is obviously a common one for layer 3. But what ways can you have movement in layer 2 that make sure that they stay out of the way of layer 1? Because if they get in the way, the layers just turn gray. They just blend together. There's no separation. And this is the thing I fall back on a lot, but the Berkeley Arranging 2 textbook has great instructions about how to make voicings that are strong and clean, that don't get in the way of each other, and have the right information in the right place to really serve your melody. And so as a resource, I'd recommend that book, honestly. It's really great.
Sorry, what's the title again?
The Berkeley Arranging 2 textbook.
Thanks.
Yes. And maybe get into the chord skills one too. That's arranging 3. Oh, yeah.
Well, your presentation, how long did it take to make that?
How long did it take me to make that? A couple weeks. Yeah, I was on and off I was on and off doing it here and there for 2 weeks, and then 4 days from today ago, I started really digging into it and making all the slides and rearranging all the charts. So I'd say 2 weeks of prep and then 4 days of sitting in front of my computer making material.
That was incredible. I mean, just the presentation itself. I sometimes think partners at work is this is such a breath of fresh air.
Thanks, man. Well, I'm really glad you reached out to me via Reddit. That's really awesome.
And Dan's
oh, there he is. What's up? That was you. Yeah, what's up?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. What's up?
I mean, you got a question as well. I mean,
I just got here, and I was just wondering if at the end of the presentation you guys would be able to close out with another number if you...
Oh man, I wish we had any more charts. I didn't bring any more.
Oh, is that it?
That was it. That's all the music I printed.
No problem.
How do you guys feel about improv one? We can get you some sheets to play off. We'll take it out.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, sure.
All right. Name a video game that somebody name a video game, not you.
How about the athletic game from Yoshi's Island 2?
Yeah.
You gotta know your tunes. This one's kind of like a we arranged this. It's sort of like a 30 swing. It's kind of like a trap jazz. Yeah.
Not 666.
Yeah.
You want me to play drum? Sure. What do you want to play? Nothing. I don't know.
Oh yeah, would you put
No, I don't know.
Yes.
You can throw this on the screen.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Charlie, I think
Yeah,
it's
so
like piano.
Any chart for piano? We're all transcribed by our staff.
Well, I guess we're getting the jam kicked back off with this chart. So thank you again for all your great questions, and thanks for coming. And we're gonna play a tune as a video game jazz club. Thanks, y'all.
Also, the jam session tonight. Would you add the music?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Me and Adam and the 8-Bit Music Theory are doing a jam from 8 to 10. And is that here?
Yeah, so it's kind of like open jam.
Okay.
You guys do your thing. We'll invite
Sick. See, that's 8 p.m. Yeah, 8 p.m. Cool. How fun is that? And also follow us on Instagram and everything else, and YouTube. We've got tons of videos at the 8-Bit Big Band. Hopefully we'll come back and do a show with our full orchestra and big band. So that's 60 people.
This is going to be a little weird. Oh, you print that chart.
Do what you want with it.
Actually, let's play it over the mic. So this is Jimmy. Why don't you do some? We'll do like a Dixieland thing, So like in Dixieland, trombone plays the shit, trumpets on the melody. Who wants to play clarinet? Anyone? No. Yeah, you're slap tongue. Slap tongue.
Are there any keys that you guys want to see?
And also, let's do some. These first 4 bars here, some hits, right? So like, ga 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 ga. Hey.
Everybody all set?
I think so.
Okay, sick.
I can turn up my. It's like a.
Great. Yeah, shall we?
Are you doing like
So, yes, scoopy background. Okay, I'll do that when I'm not on melody. The form, this last line of the thing, I guess, is the ending, because the form is really A 2 times B, and then this 8 bar C, and then solos back to A.
Okay.
These 8 bars at the end here that have those half notes in them. Yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what it is. But if we want to do some sort of ending that's like a stop ending, So yeah, ready? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and.
Thanks, Emilio.